in the shadowed vaults of eternity, where whispers of forgotten kings echo like the last breath of a dying star, one word alone can summon the legions from oblivion. The wind howled through the crumbling spires of Eldrath Keep, carrying the scent of frost-kissed stone and the faint metallic tang of blood long dried. Ilara Voss, born under a blood moon in the forsaken hills of Transylvania, had always been a creature of fractured light, 30 years of age, yet her eyes held the weariness of centuries. Her mother, a mortal healer abandoned by her village for consorting with shadows, had birthed her in secrecy, only to perish from the fever that twisted Ilara's veins with half-life. Raised by nomadic scholars who whispered of ancient pacts, Ilara had wandered Europe's war-torn fringes, her body a battlefield of human frailty and vampiric hunger. She was no full immortal, but a Dhampir, cursed with the thirst that never fully quenched and the heart that still beat with mortal desperation. Disillusioned by the endless skirmishes between human realms and the nocturnal courts, she sought solace in forgotten libraries, her only desire a fragile peace amid the chaos of her dual nature. Yet guilt gnawed at her, guilt for the lives she'd taken in fits of rage, for the humanity she could neither embrace nor escape. Tonight, that guilt drew her to the keep's great hall, where moonlight filtered through jagged stained-glass windows, painting the flagstones in hues of crimson and indigo. The air was thick with the chill of abandonment. Dust motes danced like lost souls in the beams. Ilara's boots echoed softly against the worn oak, each step a reluctant pull toward the figure enthroned at the hall's far end. He was Victor Draven, the Vampire King, eternal sovereign of the shadowed enclaves, his reign spanning a millennium since his turning in the blood-soaked fields of medieval Wallachia. At what mortals would call timeless, he appeared in his prime, tall, with raven hair falling like midnight silk over shoulders, broad from battles long faded. His eyes, a piercing silver, held the solitude of one who had outlived empires, his skin pale as marble veined with the faint scars of ancient wars. Ethical to a fault, Victor had forged his rule not through tyranny, but through pacts of mutual shadow, guiding his kind away from mindless predation. Yet betrayal had marked him deepest. A century ago, his own council had turned against him in a political coup, whispering lies that shattered his legions. His army, vampires loyal through eons of siege and intrigue, had scattered into the mists, lost to doubt and rival thrones. Guilt consumed him, for he had trusted too deeply, and now the encroaching human wars threatened to engulf the night entirely. Ilara paused at the threshold, her breath visible in the cold. She had come at his summons, delivered by a raven's scroll inked with symbols only she could read, remnants of the old tongue her scholars had taught her. Why her? A Dhampir, neither fish nor fowl, abandoned by both worlds. Her hand trembled as she clutched the amulet at her throat, a silver locket etched with a thorned rose, the symbol her mother had pressed into her infant palm. It was her anchor, a reminder of fragile beauty amid thorns, now warmed by her pulse, a pulse Victor no longer possessed. You tread where mortals fear, Victor's voice resonated, low and resonant as the toll of a distant bell, stirring the silence like a hand through still water. He did not rise from his throne of blackened ebony, carved with the sigils of fallen allies, but his gaze pinned her, unyielding yet laced with a sorrow that mirrored her own. Ilara's lips parted, tasting the salt of her unease. "And immortals despair," she replied, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. She had rationalized this meeting 100 times on the road. Curiosity, perhaps, or the pull of shared isolation. Love? No, that was a fool's delusion, a spark she dared not fan. Yet as she approached, the air between them thickened, charged with the unspoken weight of their fractures. He gestured to the space beside him, a velvet-draped chair untouched for decades. "Sit, Ilara Voss. The winds speak of your lineage, the blood that bridges worlds. I have lost what kings hold dearest, my kin, my shield against the dawn." His fingers traced the arm of his throne, revealing a faint scar across his knuckles, a relic from the night his council betrayed him, blades drawn in the very chamber where they now stood. She hesitated, the Dhampir fire in her veins warring with the human chill of doubt. Sitting meant acknowledging the invisible death that lingered here, the specter of choices unmade. "Your army scatters because trust is a fragile veil," she said, lowering herself onto the edge of the seat. The fabric sighed beneath her, soft as forgotten promises. Up close, Victor's presence was a sensory storm, the subtle scent of aged wine and earth, the faint glow of his skin under the moonlight, like porcelain lit from within. Introspection settled over them as the wind battered the windows, rain beginning to patter like hesitant tears. Victor leaned forward, his voice a murmur that wove through her thoughts. "In the great wars of old, when human kings razed our hidden realms, my legions stood as one. But betrayal from within, a whisper of my growing mercy toward mortals, shattered them. They fled to rival shadows, leaving me to this hollow throne. And you, half light, half dark, why do the ancients call you now?" Alara's fingers tightened on the locket, the thorned rose pressing into her palm like a warning. She had dreamed of this king in fragments, visions of battles where blood rained like mercy, of a love that could redeem or damn. But she resisted, rationalizing it as the hunger's trick. "I am no savior," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. In that silver gaze, she saw her own guilt reflected. The villagers she'd failed to protect, the nights she'd prowled alone, torn between worlds. The old tongue binds what reason breaks, but to speak it, to summon them back, what price for a Dhampir's word? A revelation stirred then, slow as the turning of a key in a rusted lock. Victor extended his hand, palm up, revealing the intricate tattoos of his lost oaths, symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. "The choice is yours, Alara. Utter the word, and my army returns. Bind yourself to this shadow, and perhaps find redemption in the light we both crave. Or walk away and let the wars consume us all." Her heart pounded, a mortal drum against the silence as the rain swelled to a torrent. The locket burned hot now, the rose's thorns drawing a bead of blood that trickled down her skin. In that moment, the air hummed with possibility, the ritual of a single utterance, the precipice of transformation. Love flickered unbidden, a curse wrapped in redemption, inevitable as the dawn she feared. But as Alara opened her mouth, the word forming on her tongue like a forbidden prayer, a shadow detached from the rafters above, a spy from the rival courts, eyes gleaming with malice. Victor's hand shot out, but too late. The intruder's blade whispered through the air, aimed not at the king, but at the Dhampir's throat. And in that suspended breath, Alara's choice hung, fragile as the rain-lashed glass, threatening to shatter everything. The blade sliced through the air like a shard of fractured moonlight, its edge humming with the venom of shadowed intent. Alara twisted instinctively, her Dhampir reflexes igniting in a blur of motion that blurred the line between mortal fear and immortal grace. The steel whispered past her throat, nicking the skin just above her collarbone, where the locket's chain lay warm against her pulse. A thin line of blood welled up, crimson as the stained glass above, dripping onto the velvet of the chair in slow, accusing beads. Pain bloomed sharp and immediate, a reminder of her fragile tether to life, but she did not cry out. Instead, she lunged sideways, her hand closing around the intruder's wrist with a strength born of desperation. Victor's form uncoiled from the throne like a storm unleashed, his silver eyes flashing with the cold fury of a king long betrayed. He moved not with the frantic speed of prey, but the deliberate precision of a predator who had danced this waltz through centuries of ambushes. His fingers, pale and unyielding as marble, seized the spy's shoulder, twisting it with a crack that echoed through the hall like breaking bone. The intruder, a lithe vampire from the rival courts of the eastern mists, his face hooded in black silk, hissed, fangs bared in a snarl that revealed the rot of disloyalty. "The word dies with her," he spat, his voice a rasp of wind through thorns, before Victor hurled him against the far wall. The impact shattered a candelabro, wax candles tumbling in a cascade of golden flame that licked at the shadows, casting erratic light across the chamber. Flames sputtered on the damp stone, their smoke curling upward like the ghosts of unspoken oaths. Ilara rose, her breath ragged, tasting the copper of her own blood on her lips. The wound throbbed, a hot pulse that mirrored the deeper ache in her chest. The interruption of that precipice moment, where the ancient word had hovered on her tongue, heavy with power and peril. She pressed a hand to the cut, her fingers coming away slick, and met Victor's gaze across the chaos. In his eyes, she saw not just the warrior's resolve, but a flicker of something raw. Fear, not for himself, but for the fragile bridge she represented. The spy scrambled to his feet, his cloak tearing on the jagged flagstones, revealing the insignia of the fractured veil, a splintered crown embroidered in silver thread, emblem of the council that had once been Victor's own. "Your mercy weakens you, Draven," he sneered, circling them with the wary grace of a wolf denied its kill. Rain hammered the windows now, a relentless drum that drowned the distant thunder of approaching storms, both literal and metaphorical. The air grew thick with the scent of wet earth seeping through cracks, mingling with the acrid bite of spilled blood and smoldering wax. Victor stepped between Ilara and the assassin, his body a shield of shadowed elegance. "Mercy is the chain that binds empires," he murmured, his voice low, threaded with the philosophy of one who had witnessed the fall of too many thrones. "You fled it once, brother of the night. Will you die for the lies that scattered us?" The words hung heavy, an introspection forced upon them all in the heat of confrontation. Ilara felt it too, the weight of choices past. Her own betrayals echoed in her mind. The scholars who had raised her, only to cast her out when her hunger turned feral during a winter siege. The human lovers who had withered under her touch, their warmth leaching into her endless chill. She was no stranger to fracture, her Dhampir soul a mosaic of light and void, forever resisting the pull toward wholeness. The spy lunged again, blade flashing in the firelight. But Ilara was ready. She darted forward, her movements fluid despite the sting in her neck, driven by a surge of that resisted inevitability. The bond forming between her and Victor, rationalized as mere survival, yet blooming like a thorned rose in barren soil. Her fist connected with the assassin's jaw, the impact jarring through her bones, a tactile reminder of her half-strength. Enough to wound, but never to forget the frailty beneath. Victor followed, his hand clamping around the spy's throat, lifting him effortlessly, as if he weighed no more than mist. The intruder's eyes bulged, fangs gnashing futilely, until Victor whispered a single syllable in the old tongue, a binding curse that made the air shimmer with ethereal chains, invisible yet unyielding. The body slumped to the floor, not dead. Victor's ethics forbade such finality without trial, but bound in enchanted slumber, his breaths shallow as the dying embers. Silence descended, broken only by the rain's mournful cadence and Ilara's slowing heartbeat. She leaned against the throne, the ebony cool against her back, her locket now stained with her blood. The thorned rose etched deeper into her awareness. It symbolized more than memory now. It was the mark of her choice, the beauty that drew blood even as it promised redemption. Victor turned to her, his expression a mask of controlled torment, the scar on his knuckles stark in the flickering light. He reached out, hesitating before gently tilting her chin to inspect the wound. His touch was feather-light, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. "You bleed as the living do," he said softly, his silver eyes tracing the line of red. "A reminder of what I lost, and what you risk." Up close, his scent enveloped her, ancient leather and faint ozone, like a storm held at bay. She wanted to pull away, to rationalize this pull as the adrenaline's lie, but her body betrayed her, leaning into the contact. "The word," she whispered, her voice hoarse, the ancient syllables echoing in her mind like a half-remembered lullaby. It was there, on the edge. But this is the curse of our worlds colliding. Your enemies sense it, the power in a Dhampir's voice. Introspection wrapped around them. The hall's ruins a mirror to their souls, cracked yet enduring. Victor's guilt surfaced in the lines of his face, the weight of his scattered legions pressing like the storm outside. He had chosen eternity not for power, but to protect, only to watch it unravel through betrayal. And she, abandoned by blood and kind alike, desired only the peace of belonging, yet feared the transformation it demanded. He withdrew his hand, but the space between them hummed with unspoken tension. "The old tongue is no mere spell," he confessed, his tone laced with sorrow. "It calls not just bodies, but loyalties, demanding a vow from the speaker. Bind your essence to mine, Elara, and the army returns. But love, it entwines like these thorns." His gaze fell to the locket, understanding its symbolism without words. Her heart ached, a mortal throb against the Dhampir void, as she traced the bloodied rose. The choice loomed: utter the word and embrace the shadow, or retreat into isolation, letting the wars of men and immortals rage unchecked. Death lingered in the corners, its invisible presence a chill breath on her skin, whispering of sacrifices yet to come. Yet as Victor stepped closer, his hand hovering near hers, a distant rumble shook the keep. Not thunder, but the approach of more shadows drawn by the skirmish's echo. Allies or foes? The precipice widened, and Elara's lips parted once more, the word rising like a forbidden dawn. But in that breath, doubt flickered. Would redemption come? Or would it claim her light forever? The rumble deepened, vibrating through the flagstones like the growl of some primordial beast stirring from slumber beneath the earth. Elara's hand instinctively flew to her locket, the thorned rose now slick with drying blood, its edges biting into her palm as if to anchor her against the tide of uncertainty. The hall, once a sanctuary of shadowed confessions, now felt like a cage, the rain-swept windows rattling in their ancient frames, casting fractured moonlight across the bound spy's form. His chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, a prisoner of Victor's ancient binding, but his presence was a harbinger, whispers of the fractured veil's reach, their political machinations weaving through the night like venomous roots. Victor tensed beside her, his body a coiled spring of eternal vigilance, the faint scars on his knuckles glowing faintly under the sputtering candlelight. He did not fear death. Immortality had stripped him of that illusion long ago. But the fragility of this moment, this Dhampir who bridged his shattered world, ignited a protectiveness he had not felt since the wars that forged his throne. "They come," he murmured, his voice a low timbre that cut through the storm's fury, resonant as the tolling of a bell buried in fog. His silver eyes scanned the rafters, where shadows pooled like spilled ink, and Elara followed his gaze, her pulse a frantic counterpoint to the silence that followed the rumble. She stepped closer to him, the air between them charged with the scent of ozone and smoldering wax, a sensory veil that blurred the line between resistance and surrender. Love, she told herself, was a mortal folly, a rationalization for the pull she felt, the way his presence steadied the chaos in her veins like moonlight piercing storm clouds. Yet it was inevitable, this entanglement, a curse that promised redemption even as it threatened to eclipse her fading light. Her wound throbbed, a warm trickle reminding her of the human cost, the death that shadowed every choice. "Who?" she asked, her breath misting in the chill, though she knew the answer in her bones, echoes of betrayal, rivals hungry for the power Victor once commanded. From the arched doorway, figures emerged, not a horde, but a vanguard of 3, cloaked in mist-dampened velvet, their eyes gleaming with the feral hunger of the displaced. Vampires of the eastern courts, their faces etched with the gauntness of endless exile, fangs subtly visible in the fire's glow. The leader, a woman with hair like spun obsidian and a scar bisecting her cheek, a mark from Victor's old legions, halted at the threshold, her gaze locking on the bound spy with a mix of disdain and calculation. "Draven," she intoned, her voice a silken rasp, carrying the weight of fractured oaths. "The veil sends greetings. Your mercy has left us to the wolves of human wars. We seek alliance, not subjugation." Victor's laugh was a hollow echo, devoid of mirth, as he positioned himself between Alara and the intruders. The throne room's air thickened, heavy with the texture of unspoken histories. The political betrayals that had splintered his army during the great sieges, when mortal kings had marched with iron and fire, forcing immortals into hidden pacts. He had chosen ethics over conquest, sparing human villages in exchange for fragile truces, only for his council to deem it weakness. Now, these remnants circled like scavengers, their loyalty a commodity bartered in the shadows. "Alliance?" he replied, his tone laced with philosophical bite, each word measured as a blade's edge. "You fled when trust was tested. What brings you back, if not the scent of power on the wind?" Alara's mind raced, introspection flooding her like the rain beyond the glass. She was no warrior queen, her body a vessel of half measures, strong enough to fight, frail enough to bleed. Abandoned by her mother's kin, disillusioned by the scholar's rejection, she had wandered into this abyss seeking meaning, not a crown. Yet here, amid the ruins, Victor's solitude mirrored her own, a guilt shared in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. The locket warmed against her skin, the rose's thorns a tactile promise. Beauty born of pain, redemption woven through suffering. She rationalized her urge to stand with him as survival's dictate, but deeper, it stirred, a love resisted, blooming in the fertile ground of mutual despair. The scarred woman advanced, her boots whispering over the stone, rain dripping from her cloak in rhythmic patters that mimicked distant heartbeats. "The human realms encroach," she said, her eyes flicking to Alara with predatory curiosity. "Their iron machines tear at our borders," we heard whispers, a Dhampir summoned by the old tongue. "If you reclaim your legions, Draven, we would kneel. But the word, it demands a price." Her companions flanked her, their forms blurring slightly in the candlelight, a subtle display of their shadowed arts. Victor's hand brushed Alara's arm, a fleeting touch that sent warmth cascading through her chill, like sunlight piercing velvet night. "The choice remains yours," he whispered, only for her ears, his breath cool against her ear. In that intimacy, the hall's textures enveloped them, the velvet's soft decay underfoot, the metallic tang of blood mingling with wet stone, the low hum of the binding spell holding the spy. Death hovered, invisible yet palpable, in the intruder's calculated stares. Not an end, but a transformation, a war of wills where eternity hung in balance. Alara straightened, her voice emerging steady, threaded with the poetic resolve of one who had long danced on fracture's edge. "The old tongue is no chain for the unworthy," she declared, stepping forward, her wound's ache a distant echo. The air shimmered as she drew upon the scholar's lore, the ancient syllables rising unbidden, fueled by the bond she could no longer deny. Introspection yielded to action, her dilemma's moral crystallized into purpose. Love, that cursed redemption, propelled her. For Victor, for the light in his shadowed gaze, for the army that might shield them all from the encroaching dawn. She uttered the word then, a single utterance in the forgotten dialect. Vespera. It rolled from her tongue like thunder wrapped in silk, vibrating through the chamber with ethereal force. The candles flared, their flames stretching tall as golden sentinels, and the windows rattled violently, rain sheeting against the glass in a symphony of awakening. A wind howled inward, carrying the faint cries of distant legions, echoes of loyalty reborn, stirring from oblivion. The intruders knelt, compelled by the ritual's power, their eyes wide with awe and fear. But as the word's resonance faded, Ilara staggered, a wave of exhaustion crashing over her, the Dhampir thirst igniting like fire in her veins. Victor's arm caught her, his touch a lifeline, but in his eyes. She saw the revelation's cost. The binding had entwined their essences, a vow unspoken, yet sealed. Redemption dawned, yet the curse deepened, her light dimming, his shadows claiming. Yet even as the first shadows of returning legions coalesced at the hall's edges, a betrayal's echo pierced the triumph. The bound spy's eyes fluttered open, his lips curling in a silent incantation, summoning reinforcements from the storm. The precipice cracked wider, and Ilara's vision blurred, the choice's weight threatening to pull her into eternity's embrace, or shatter it forever. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The word Vespera lingered in the air like the final note of a requiem, its ancient resonance weaving through the hall's crumbling arches, pulling at the threads of forgotten loyalties. Ilara's knees buckled under the ritual's recoil, her vision splintering into shards of moonlight and shadow, as if the very fabric of her being had been unraveled and rewoven in an instant. Victor's arm encircled her waist, steady and unyielding, his cool touch a counterpoint to the feverish heat surging through her veins. The Dhampir thirst awakening not with hunger, but with a deeper unraveling, as though the word had siphoned a fragment of her mortal light. She leaned into him, rationalizing the intimacy as necessity, yet feeling the inevitable pull, that cursed bloom of love threading through her fractures like roots seeking soil. The locket at her throat pulsed hot, the thorned rose now etched with her own blood, a symbol no longer of solitary memory, but of shared entanglement, its petals unfurling in the quiet storm of their proximity. The hall transformed in the word's wake. Candles guttered and reignited, their flames leaping higher, casting elongated shadows that danced like spectral warriors across the flagstones. From the periphery, forms materialized, ethereal at first, wisps of mist coalescing into solid shapes. Vampires of Victor's lost legions, their eyes glowing with the silvered recognition of oaths renewed. They emerged from the storm beyond the windows, rain sluicing off cloaks tattered by centuries of exile, their boots thudding softly against the stone in a rhythm that echoed distant heartbeats. Whispers rippled through them, fragments of the old tongue carrying the scent of fog-shrouded battlefields and the faint, iron bite of ancient blood. One by one, they knelt before the throne, heads bowed not in fear, but in the solemn gravity of redemption. A king's army reborn from the ashes of betrayal, their forms illuminated by the moonlight, fracturing through the glass like veins of quicksilver. Victor held Ilara close, his breath a cool whisper against her temple, stirring the damp tendrils of her hair. "You have done what eons could not," he murmured, his voice laced with a wonder tempered by sorrow, the ethical weight of his rule pressing upon him like the throne's ebony carvings. He had chosen eternity not for dominion, but to safeguard the shadowed balance between night and day, only to see it fracture under the council's political knives. Now, with her word, that balance teetered on redemption's edge, yet guilt shadowed his silver gaze. The knowledge that this summoning bound her to his solitude, a curse disguised as salvation. She felt it too, the moral dilemma coiling in her chest. Had she uttered Vespera for him, for the fragile peace she craved, or for the light she glimpsed in his tormented eyes? Her body ached, the wound at her throat a dull throb, blood crusting like dried petals, reminding her of death's invisible caress, the ever-present specter that claimed mortals swiftly, immortals slowly, through endless loss. The kneeling legions rose at Victor's gesture, their movements fluid and synchronized, a testament to the wars that had forged them. Sieges against human empires where moonlight had been their ally. Betrayals in mist-veiled councils where whispers had toppled thrones. The scarred woman from the vanguard stepped forward, her obsidian hair clinging wetly to her shoulders, rain dripping in rhythmic plinks that mingled with the hall's settling hush. "My liege," she said, her voice a velvet rasp, eyes flicking to Alara with newfound respect laced with wariness. "The word has called us from the fringes. The human wars encroach. Ironclad legions march on our borders, their fires devouring the night. With your army whole, we can turn the tide." Her companions nodded, their faces etched with the gaunt lines of displacement, the political fractures of the fractured veil still raw in their postures. Alara pulled away from Victor slightly, steadying herself against the throne's arm, the velvet's worn texture grounding her amid the sensory whirlwind. The ozone tang of summoned mist, the low murmur of reuniting kin like wind through ruins, the faint glow of candlelight on pale skin. Introspection flooded her, a philosophical tide washing over the action's ebb. She was broken, her life a tapestry of abandonment, mother lost to fever, scholars fleeing her feral nights, lovers withered by her half-hunger. Disillusioned wanderer, she had sought only solace in forgotten tomes, yet here she stood, Dhampir bridge to eternity, her choice transforming suffering into something luminous, tragic. Love resisted her still. She rationalized it as the ritual's echo, a shared guilt binding them, but it bloomed inevitable, sensual in its depth, a redemption that doiled and healed, cursing her with the fear of losing her pulse's fragile song. Victor turned to her, his hand lingering near hers, the scar on his knuckles a faint map of old wounds. "The binding is sealed," he confessed softly, his tone intimate, drawing her into the emotional close of the chamber's vastness. "Your essence entwines with mine now, Alara. The legions heed not just my command, but yours through the word. Yet this power, it draws the shadows closer." His eyes held hers, silver depths reflecting her own oscillation between light and void, the beauty of human suffering mirrored in his immortal despair. He desired connection after centuries of ethical isolation, marked by the guilt of trusting too deeply. Councils turned to daggers, armies scattered like leaves in autumn wars. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, he seemed to say without words, and in her he saw the choice renewed. The revelation crystallized then, a ritual moment amid the gathering. Alara lifted the locket, its thorned rose catching the light, and pressed it into Victor's palm. "This is my anchor," she whispered, her voice steady despite the thirst's insistent pull, a choice between yielding to eternity's embrace or clinging to her half-life's thorns. "Wear it as reminder that redemption bleeds but does not break." He accepted it, the silver warm from her skin, fastening it around his neck where it rested against his chest, a beatless echo. The legions watched in silence, the air humming with the texture of transformation. Rain easing to a patter, candles steadying to golden pools, the hall's ruins seeming less forsaken. Yet as vows unspoken solidified, the bound spy stirred fully, his incantation breaking free in a guttural chant that shattered the fragile peace. The windows exploded inward, shards of glass raining like frozen tears. And through the breach poured reinforcements, dozens of fractured veil warriors, their cloaks billowing like storm clouds, blades drawn with the gleam of political ambition. Betrayal's echo roared to life, a war igniting in the heart of reunion. Victor's legions surged forward, fangs bared in protective fury, but the spy's eyes locked on Alara, his whisper carrying over the clash. "The Dhampir's light will dim the king's shadow forever." Clash of steel and snarls filled the hall, blood spraying in arcs that caught the moonlight. But Ilara staggered back, the bindings cost crashing over her, a vision flashing unbidden. Her own transformation, pulse fading into Victor's eternal chill, love's redemption demanding her humanity's surrender. Victor fought toward her, his form a blur of shadowed grace. Yet the spy's blade arced true, forcing her to choose in that suspended chaos. Flee into the night alone, or bind deeper, risking the light she still cherished. The precipice yawned, and as reinforcements overwhelmed the threshold, Ilara's hand reached for Victor's. The thorn rose between them, a fragile thread against the encroaching dark. The clash erupted like a storm breaking over ancient stone, steel singing against steel in a cacophony that drowned the rain's mournful dirge. Ilara's fingers intertwined with Victor's. The thorned rose locket caught between their palms, a searing link of silver and blood, its edges drawing fresh pinpricks that mingled their essences in a ritual unintended yet profound. The hall, once a vault of whispered confessions, devolved into a maelstrom of shadowed fury. Victor's legions surged forward, their forms blurring into ethereal blurs of midnight silk and bared fangs, clashing with the fractured veil's reinforcements, who poured through the shattered windows like venomous tide. Glass shards glittered on the flagstones, catching the candlelight in deadly prisms, while the air thickened with the metallic tang of spilled blood and the acrid bite of torn velvet. Rain lashed inward, soaking cloaks and slicking blades, turning the stone floor into a treacherous mosaic of reflection and ruin. Victor pulled Ilara behind the throne's bulk, his body a barrier of unyielding grace, but his silver eyes never left hers, mirroring the turmoil in her soul, that oscillation between the light she clung to and the shadow that called her name. "Stay with me," he urged, his voice a low rumble amid the snarls and impacts. Cool breath ghosting her skin like mist over fevered flesh. She nodded, though doubt coiled in her chest, a moral serpent questioning the depth of this binding. The word Vespera had summoned not just armies, but a deeper entanglement. Her Dhampir thirst now echoed his eternal void, a hunger that whispered of transformation, of surrendering her pulse for the immortality he bore like a crown of thorns. Love, resisted as a delusion born of chaos, pressed inevitable against her ribs, sensual in its tragedy, a redemption that promised to heal her fractures even as it cursed her with endless night. She rationalized it still. Survival's pact, not the soul-deep pull that made his touch ignite forgotten warmth. A Veil warrior lunged over the throne's edge, his blade arcing in a silver crescent aimed at Victor's back. Ilara moved without thought, her half-strength surging in a blur that shamed her mortal frailty. She intercepted with a kick to his knee, the crack of bone resounding like thunder in her ears. He crumpled, but not before his dagger grazed her arm, slicing through sleeve and skin in a hot line that bloomed crimson, the pain a vivid texture, sharp as betrayal, warm as the life she feared losing. Victor whirled, dispatching the foe with a precise twist that sent him sprawling into the fray, bound by the same ethereal chains he'd used on the spy. "You fight as one born to this shadow," he said, his hand cupping her elbow, steadying her as blood trickled down her forearm, staining the ebony throne. In his gaze, guilt flickered, not for the violence, but for drawing her into his world's endless wars, the political betrayals that had scattered his kin and now threatened to claim her light. Introspection pierced the action like moonlight through storm clouds, forcing Ilara to confront the philosophical undercurrent amid the sensory assault. The low growls of combatants, the wet slap of boots on bloodied stone, the faint ozone of summoned magics clashing in the air. She was broken, her life a litany of abandonment. Mother's fevered deathbed, scholar's horrified exile when her hunger turned feral during border skirmishes, lovers who faded under her insatiable chill. Disillusioned seeker of peace, she had wandered into Eldrath Keep, chasing whispers of ancient balance, only to find Victor, ethical king marked by a millennium's solitude, his rule forged in pacts that spared human realms during the Great Iron Wars, only to be undone by his council's whispers of weakness. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, and in him she saw her own precipice, the choice between clinging to her half-life's suffering or embracing eternity's redemptive curse. Death lingered in the chaos, invisible arbiter selecting the fallen, its chill breath on the necks of the living, a reminder that even immortals could fracture into oblivion. The scarred woman from the vanguard fought at their side now, her obsidian hair whipping like a banner as she felled two veil assailants with fluid strikes, her scar twisting in grim determination. "The spy's chant weakens the binding!" she shouted over the din, her voice cutting through like a blade through fog. Indeed, the reinforcements pressed harder, their numbers swelling from the storm, driven by the fractured veil's ambition to seize Victor's reclaimed throne. The spy himself rose amid the melee, his form unbound by his own incantation, eyes blazing with malicious triumph as he directed his kin toward the throne. Ilara's vision swam, the ritual's cost manifesting. Waves of exhaustion pulled at her, the thirst igniting like embers in her core, blurring the line between her human heart's frantic beat and Victor's silent eternity. In a lull amid the press, Victor drew her close, their backs to the throne, as legions formed a protective ring. The candle flames flickered erratically, casting their faces in golden hollows and deep umbras, the rain's patter a counterpoint to the labored breaths around them. "The word has bound us," he confessed, his fingers tracing the fresh wound on her arm, a touch feather-light yet intimate, sending shivers through her that warred with the pain. Blood smeared between them, warm and vital, a stark contrast to his cool pallor. "But to hold the legions true, you must choose fully. Offer your light to seal the vow, or the shadows will unravel it all." His words hung heavy, a revelation wrapped in ritual, not mere alliance, but a transformation's threshold where her Dhampir essence could merge with his, granting her the strength to command without losing her soul entirely. Yet the cost loomed. Her pulse would slow, the human warmth dimming into his shadowed grace, love's redemption demanding she become the very curse she resisted. Ilara's breath hitched. The locket's thorns now a shared emblem around his neck, its rose pulsing faintly against his chest like a borrowed heartbeat. She pressed her palm to it, feeling the faint vibration, a symbolic tether amid the ruin. Guilt mirrored his own, for the lives her hesitation might doom, for the beauty of suffering she had romanticized in lonely nights, now demanding action. The air hummed with texture, the velvet's damp cling, the metallic drip of blood pooling nearby, the distant thunder of clashing steel. Faith and despair warred within her, the memory of her mother's last whisper, "Choose life, even in shadow," clashing with the inevitability of this bond. Love, no longer rationalized, bloomed tragic and sensual, a force that doiled her illusions and promised transcendence. She nodded, the choice crystallizing in the heat of battle. "Seal it," she whispered, leaning into him, her lips brushing his ear in a moment of profound intimacy. Victor inclined his head, murmuring the old tongue's counter-ritual, his free hand cupping her face as ethereal light wove between them. Golden threads from her wounds mingling with his silver aura, binding without bite, transformation without full death. Strength flooded her, the thirst quelled to a steady hum, her vision sharpening to pierce the fray. The legions rallied, their roars unified under the sealed vow, turning the tide as they repelled the veil's advance. But as the spy lunged through the thinning ranks, his blade aimed at the locket, seeking to sever the bond at its heart, Ilara met him head-on, her enhanced grace a blur. She disarmed him with a twist, but his final whisper slithered into her ear. "The king's mercy blinds him. The Dhampir carries a secret that will shatter the legions anew." Doubt seeded in that breath, a moral fracture amid triumph, as Victor dispatched the spy into enchanted slumber once more. The hall fell to uneasy quiet, the storm easing outside, but Alara's heart pounded with the revelation's shadow. What secret haunted her blood, inherited from her mother's forbidden union, that could undo all they had reclaimed? Victor's hand tightened on hers, love's curse deepening as the legions knelt in victory. Yet the precipice of betrayal yawned wider, threatening to claim not just thrones, but souls. The hall's uneasy quiet settled like dust after a tempest, the air heavy with the mingled scents of rain-soaked stone, singed velvet, and the coppery residue of blood that painted the flagstones in abstract sigils of survival. Alara stood amid the remnants of chaos, her hand still clasped in Victor's, the thorned rose locket a warm talisman against his cool skin, its petals now seeming to pulse with the faint echo of her heartbeat. The legions, reformed and resolute, formed a vigilant circle around the throne, their silvered eyes watchful, breaths synchronized in the hush that followed victory. Yet the spy's final whisper coiled in her mind like smoke refusing to dissipate, a secret in her blood, inherited from her mother's shadowed union, poised to fracture what Vespera had mended. Doubt bloomed there, a moral thorn sharper than the locket's edges, questioning not just her choice, but the very foundation of the redemption she had forged. Victor released her hand slowly, his touch lingering as if reluctant to sever the ethereal threads that bound them, his silver gaze searching her face with an intensity that stripped away pretenses. The candle flames had steadied, casting a golden halo around his form, illuminating the faint scars that mapped his eternity, reminders of battles where mercy had been his blade and betrayal his deepest wound. He had ruled with ethics carved from centuries of loss, sparing human enclaves during the iron wars that ravaged borders, only to watch his counsel splinter under whispers of softness. Solitude had been his companion, guilt his crown, until her arrival, the Dhampir, who bridged his shadows with her fractured light. "Speak it," he urged softly, his voice a resonant murmur that wove through the hall's textures, the damp cling of cloaks, the subtle creak of settling ruins, the distant drip of rainwater from fractured arches. The spy's venom seeks to poison what we have sealed, your blood. Does it carry a shadow I have not seen? Alara's breath caught, the wound on her arm a dull ache now, its scabbed line a tactile map of her oscillation between worlds. She was 30 years of woven fractures, born in Transylvania's forsaken hills to a healer mother who died whispering of forbidden pacts, raised by scholars who fled her feral hungers during siege-torn winters, abandoned by lovers who withered under her insatiable chill. Disillusioned wanderer, she had sought peace in ancient tomes, rationalizing her pull to Victor as mere curiosity, yet love had proven inevitable, a sensual curse that redeemed her isolation even as it threatened to eclipse her pulse. Death hovered in the quiet, its invisible presence a chill draft through the hall, selecting the fallen Vale warriors who lay bound in enchanted slumber, their forms still as forgotten oaths. She traced the locket at his throat, the rose's thorns drawing a bead of her blood anew, symbolic of beauty's inevitable cost. Introspection enveloped her like the fog rolling in from the storm's retreat, philosophical tides washing over the action's ebb. The legions watched in silence, their renewed loyalty a fragile veil against the political tempests brewing beyond Eldrath's walls. Human armies with their mechanical thunder encroaching on immortal shadows, rival courts scheming in mist-veiled enclaves. Victor desired her fully, not as a tool of summoning, but as the light to his endless night, marked by the guilt of drawing her into his wars. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, and in his eyes she saw her own precipice mirrored, cling to her half-life's suffering, or embrace the transformation that love demanded, turning curse into transcendence. "The secret," she confessed at last, her voice steady yet laced with the tragedy of revelation, stepping closer until the scent of aged wine and earth enveloped her, intimate as a shared breath. "My mother's union was no mere mortal folly. she consorted with a Vale elder, one who sowed discord in your council long before the betrayal. His blood runs in me, a latent fracture designed to unravel bindings like Vespera from within." The words hung heavy, a ritual unmasking that stirred the air, the legions shifting uneasily, murmurs rippling like wind through thorns. Victor's expression darkened, not with accusation, but sorrow, the ethical king confronting the web of ancient deceptions that had scattered his kin. He had trusted deeply once, forging pacts amid the great wars where blood reigned like misplaced mercy, only to learn that shadows bred deeper shadows. Yet in that moment of fracture, choice crystallized, profound and redemptive. Ilara lifted her hand to his cheek, her touch warm against his marble pallor, the contact sending shivers through them both. A sensual bridge of light and void. "But I am no puppet of that legacy," she whispered, her eyes locking with his, the hall's sensory veil amplifying the intimacy, the soft glow of moonlight on his raven hair, the faint hum of the legion's anticipation, the velvet sigh under their feet. "The word bound us, but love refines it. Let me offer what remains of my light, not to shatter, but to strengthen." Victor nodded, understanding the depth of her dilemma. To infuse the binding with her willful essence, overriding the inherited curse through an act of pure choice, transforming potential doom into eternal alliance. He drew her into an embrace then, the ritual unfolding in quiet intensity, their foreheads touching, breaths mingling as she channeled her Dhampir fire, golden threads of her vitality weaving into the silvered oaths around them. The locket flared, the thorned rose blooming ethereal petals of light that spread through the hall, sealing the legion's loyalty anew, purging the latent shadow from her veins. Pain lanced through her, an exquisite burn like thorns yielding to bloom, her pulse slowing to a languid rhythm that echoed his silence, yet not extinguishing entirely. A half-transformation, redemption's compromise, where she retained her light's fragile warmth amid his eternity. The air shimmered, the bound Vale warriors stirring under reinforced chains, their whispers silenced as the political threat receded, at least for this night. The legions knelt once more, their voices rising in a choral affirmation of the old tongue, the sound resonant as a requiem turned triumphant. Victor held her close, his lips brushing her temple in a kiss soft as forgotten rain. Love's curse blooming into something luminous, tragic in its depth, redemptive in its transcendence. "You have chosen not just me," he murmured, "but the balance we both crave. In your light, my shadows find peace." Ilara leaned into him, the hall's ruins now a sanctuary rather than cage, the sensory world alive with possibility. The clean scent of post-storm air, the steady flicker of candles like stars reclaimed, the distant call of night birds heralding dawn's mercy. Yet as the first pale light crept through the mended windows, glass reforming under the ritual's grace, a final whisper of doubt lingered in her heart. Had the secret truly been purged, or did it lurk deeper, waiting for the next war's shadow to awaken? Victor's hand tightened on hers, their entwined paths a vow against the unknown, love's eternal dance between redemption and the precipice. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts. Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned.